In that case, then we move forward for the first panel discussion, because the question is, where does all the capital come from to implement all the storage and solar solutions? So the panel discussion talks about shaping the future of investments and financing in solar and storage. It's my great pleasure to introduce Sharad Somani, Head of Infrastructure Advisory of KPMG. Please.
Good morning. This is only my third session. Okay, maybe I request my panel members to come up the stage and then I introduce them. And Gavin, thanks for setting a nice stage for new opportunities.
Yes, thank you. Sorry, please go ahead. I'll wait for you.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you.
Don, hi.
Yeah.
Don.
I didn't.
All right, so thank you very much. It's a good, warm third day, Wednesday, and second day of ACES. Number of interesting discussions over the last 2 days, and thank you for joining this important session. I'm quite enthused by the 8x and 9x growth that you talked about in this region. Oh, it's not working? Hello? Okay, so whatever I said till now, nobody heard, is it? Okay, let me start by introducing the panel members. We have, of course, we know Gavin, Mr. Sun from Huawei Digital, Erik from Strategic Development Lead of Sumber Energi, and we'll talk a little bit about what you're doing. Don, CEO, founding partner, VinaCapital, and of course, we have got Hanwei Wu, Director, who has all the numbers, statistics, and prizes that we will ask him of BESS, how it's going to pan out as well. We have time till 10:30, and I will budget some time for questions as well. So there's you can scan somewhere and post questions, which I'll pick up. Of course, if you want to ask questions directly, do raise your hand and I'll reach out to you. What I would suggest we do is we start with a quick 2-minute take on your claim to fame, why you are here, and what's your view on the topic. Can we start with you?
Thanks, Sharad. So I'm Hanwei from OPIS. So we are a company, as Sharad has mentioned, to provide market and pricing data.
I think your microphones are working too well. Can you guys hear?
Maybe you take this first.
Yeah, sorry, I'll just restart that. Yeah, so I'm Hanwei and I'm from OPIS. So we provide market and pricing data for the solar supply chain. So everything from polysilicon right down to modules. So our customers include module manufacturers, include project developers. So what we've heard from them over the past year, maybe it's a bit of a mixed bag, good news, bad news, when it comes to solar and storage. Now, as we've heard from Gavin and earlier presentations, the price of modules have come down sharply. I mean, modules are basically at record lows now. Prices of batteries have come down sharply as well over the past 2 or 3 years. And I think for project developers, interest rates have finally come down. So in terms of calculating IRR, that's great news as well. And then when you look at demand, again, we've heard from earlier presentations, demand is strong in various countries. If you look at specific industry sectors, you have data centers, you have AI, you have 5G stations, all of which are using renewable energy, and in many cases, specifically solar. So that's on the positive side. But on the somewhat negative side, the lower prices that I've mentioned, record low module prices, those are actually born out of what we can say as unhealthy competition, cutthroat competition among the solar manufacturers. And that's not good in the long run, even for the project developers. And then you get your various shades of protectionism in various countries, in various regions. And again, that affects the kind of components you can buy, the kind of solar modules that you can source from. And in fact, from us, we find the greatest demand for our pricing data comes from this sort of dynamics where people are trying to find out how much modules cost in specific markets compared to some other markets. And then we're always hearing that, policies can be better, policies can be clearer, policies can be more varied in terms of encouraging solar uptake and batteries uptake. Yeah, so that's my 2-minute review.
Thank you very much, Don.
Good morning. Don Lam with VinaCapital. We are one of the largest investment fund in Vietnam. We only invest in Vietnam. And about 4 years ago, we actually started to invest in the energy business. Prior to that, I know nothing about energy except how to switch on the light. And since then, the government actually come up with a number of regulations, very favorable, and private sector investment. And the renewable space in Vietnam actually increased significantly. And you look at the industrial scale, solar plus rooftop, we're about 17 gig. That's more than the whole, I think, Southeast Asian combined. So that's a huge growth in the last few years. Of course, there's problems and challenges because the grid couldn't handle. But the big news coming from Vietnam now is that the government just passed a new regulation allowing DPPA, direct PPA, where the producer can sell directly to the consumer. And I think that's going to be a big change, especially if you look at solar and storage. So there's two ways you can do it. One is on virtual network or physical. And we are mostly focused on the physical network where we can actually sell, build, and sell directly to the consumer. And this is mostly driven by the foreign direct investment in Vietnam. People like Samsung, LG, and those guys pushing very hard for clean energy. And that's why the government have taken a leap forward to have this regulation to allow DPPA. And we are very excited. Thank you.
Thank you, Don.
Good morning. I'm Erik from a company called Cessna. Claim to fame, I think we're trying to find our way to fame. Where to start? We're one of the early solar developers from Indonesia. We go way back to 2013, 2014, when Indonesia first tried to launch its first FIT. In 2015, 2016, we came out with the first 3 megawatts of projects. That was our start. Over the years, the portfolio has diversified. We've gone into C&I rooftop, own and operate a couple of projects there. We do EPC work, but where we've really found our niche over the last 2 years is in the mining sector. So we own and operate a couple of mining microgrids, one in Kalimantan with a coal operation, another in Sulawesi in the nickel mining sector. We've got a bigger project coming up in one of the industrial parks in Sulawesi. All of those projects are implementing battery storage, as small as a couple hundred kilowatt. We make progress with the local banks and get that support. We see with PLN on new projects, all the new PLN projects have to have battery storage. So that trend is definitely there in Indonesia, and I think it's getting better.
Thanks, Erik. Sun.
Good morning, Sun from Huawei. Great to be here. We do solar inverter and energy storage for utility, commercial, industrial, and residential scenarios. I'd like to share, I think we have a lot of common consensus that the market is growing, the potential is huge, and it's growing very fast. Probably we haven't reached a common consensus. What will be the challenges for the coming years for this industry? So from our side, I think there are a couple of challenges which is quite significant. The first one is safety. Last month itself, we see a public announced the incident happened 7 worldwide, major incident for the energy storage. Safety is a challenge. The grid capability is a challenge. In many places, the grid become a bottleneck. And the third challenge is the business model dynamics. So what we believe for the investment in the solar and energy storage, 3 key factors must be considered. The first one is safety. Number one is safety is priority number one. And in order to ensure safety, there's 3 layers of expertise. There's an electrochemical layer, there's a power electronics layer, and there's a software algorithm layer. This is number one. Second is grid forming should be mandatory. Sooner or later, the grid will become weak, or weaker even. So we need to make sure that the solution we're adopting is able to support the grid. So grid forming should be mandatory. The number 3 suggestion for consideration is the business model compatibility is very essential to ensure the investment protection. in any particular market, there will be multiple business models, and there are going to be a lot of dynamics in the 15 to 20 years time range. So we need to make sure whatever solution or project we're deploying is capable to support different type of business models, and that is to ensure the investment protection. That's my side.
So yeah, you've just heard a lot from me over the last few minutes, so I will try to avoid repeating any of that. I suppose what I would think about is the market dynamic, right? So I think what's interesting for Southeast Asia is that over the last couple of decades, you've seen a lot of the Western brands moving out of China into Southeast Asia, looking for low-cost manufacturing. And then you're seeing a corresponding battle between Philippines, Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand, etc., to grab as much of that business as possible. And those brands are supply chains. There's the supply chain manufacturing for Western brands, and those Western brands are demanding, decarbonized supply chains. So I think that the really interesting dynamic and tailwind that's pushing all this forwards is that long-term dynamic, which is then also exacerbated by the last year or two of geopolitical complexity, shall we say.
Indeed, yeah. Now yesterday we discussed a lot about ASEAN grid, isn't it? And somebody was sharing some statistics that if we have to indeed triple our renewable energy as per the COP28 commitment, the total infrastructure grid requirement within ASEAN itself may be $3 trillion, right? And that is a huge, huge investment. And I think we know that's a constraint and we'll hopefully finance it. But maybe on this panel, we should probably focus more on how solar storage can reach potentially grid parity. How do we finance it? And what the business models that you mentioned, Mr. Sun, would be interesting to talk about. Maybe I start with VinaCapital, Don. Vietnam has been a poster child in terms of commissioning renewable energy, isn't it? 17 gigawatts over the last couple of years. As you rightly said, it's more than the whole of Southeast Asia, isn't it? Certain things went right, certain things probably may have been better done. My question to you, I guess, is as an investor, what opportunities do you see in Vietnam in terms of new emerging areas, given the program that they've highlighted?
I think the biggest opportunity is obviously in the direct PPA.
Yeah.
And because at the moment you basically sell to the grid, and so your customers EVN and their credit ratings are great. But if you get people like Samsung or some of the bigger blue chips company, your credit rating will be much better. And if you can, the most challenging part is some of the factories in the north where the sunlight's not great. Most of the solar's in central Vietnam. So how do you get from there to there? So you really need to find a blue chip customer closer to where you can actually produce solar energy with the storage, with the physical direct selling to them. I mean, that's what the opportunities are. And that's going to be a huge opportunity because it's more financeable when your ultimate customer is a blue chip company, multinational, than Electricity of Vietnam, for example. So from a financing perspective, it's much more financeable under this new scheme. And again, I want to applaud the Vietnamese government for taking the leap. There's not that many governments in Southeast Asia that's currently allowing direct PPA. And Vietnam is doing it way ahead. And I think that's a good thing. And this is, again, as what you were just saying earlier, it's a market dynamic. It's all pushing from the foreign direct investor, the manufacturer that's pushing for this. They're essentially saying, look, you don't allow me to access renewable energy, I'll go to India, I go to Philippines, elsewhere. And this is very important, driving forward this solar and storage solution for Vietnam.
Indeed. And I think direct PPA, corporate PPA, I think may be the way forward, given the fact that Southeast Asia is kind of becoming the factory of the world. And with CBAM and other things coming through, we'll have to decarbonize the value chain. And that's where I guess, Erik, your proposition of helping industries create those microgrids or localized solutions will become very important. Do you see that as a very big opportunity in Indonesia?
I think that's where we're seeing the growth. We started with PLN projects. We wanted to expand those 3 megawatts to 30 to 50 megawatts. PLN, we always kind of get stuck there. The general manager changes in the region. We've got to run back, build a new relationship. Eventually, I think we'll find a way to do expansion on PLN side. What is good to see with PLN is battery storage included with all new tenders. What's interesting is the percentage of battery storage with the project size. So a few years ago when we were trying to, for example, expand to 20 megawatt, maybe only 10% needed to be battery storage. Now you see the new projects coming out, probably 30 to 50% of the PV size needs to be covered with battery storage. I think that's an interesting trend. But jumping over to the microgrids and the corporates, that's really where we found the ability to move faster and support those corporates on their sustainability journey, but also find ways for them to get the cost savings as they reduce, let's say, diesel dependence and also try to reduce coal.
And what's the size of opportunity we're talking? Because there's a huge industrial grade decarbonization expected to happen. There's a lot of diesel happening.
Yeah, also a good one. So let's look at the first 2 microgrids we did with the mining guys. We started small, half a megawatt of solar, a couple hundred kilowatt hour of battery. What was good to see from the Indonesian banks is we did get refinancing on those projects, even though they are so small. And I think that's important with the bank sector, is to be able to support the bite-sized projects, right? When you have the 100 megawatt projects and the big batteries, everybody likes to do those projects. But it's the projects that are in that 10 megawatt or below, those kind of sit in that void, and you've got to find the way to get support. So we see that in Indonesia. I'll just jump countries for a moment. I was talking with one of the Philippine banks yesterday. They're looking to support small scale 2 to 3 megawatt projects, microgrids, solar and batteries. I think that's a positive development coming on the Philippine side. But back to Indonesia, so going from really small, next sizes are a little bit of expansion, 1 megawatt, 500 kilowatt hour battery. That's kind of the range. And then there's a much bigger project, going to a couple hundred megawatts of solar and 50 to 80 megawatt hour of battery. That's one of the other ones we're working on.
Okay, but earlier we heard for the 75% load factor, you highlighted that for 6 gigawatt, we need 6 plus 6 gigawatt of storage. Was that right in the presentation earlier? Kind of. Okay, the question is how far away are we from battery and solar becoming kind of base load? And what are the tariff numbers we are talking? And I mean, we can take anybody can take a shot at it.
So maybe so in my previous company we were looking at the import project. So we were looking at how can we provide from Indonesia or from Malaysia firm power. The stipulation by the tender is 75% firm. You're having to go through a subsea cable. So there's a lot of complexity, a lot of difficulty there. And I was interested to hear the professor's numbers. We were looking at sort of, for 1 gigawatt of firm power, it's more in the sort of 5 to 10 of solar plus around 10 of battery to just by itself. So with no pump storage. And then the challenge is at that 75% level, it's difficult to compete. It's difficult to be cheaper than the grid. But if you were to bring it down to a 50% firm factor, then you might be cheaper than Singapore's grid right now. And I think that's just the beginning. I think as you see the cost reductions, that's only going to get easier to do.
Okay, well this is the wall we are hitting, isn't it? I mean, we can only get solar to the grid to a certain extent, 20-25%, and then start supplementing with battery, and then battery costs are not necessarily supporting the grid parity in the short to medium term. So the question is, what amount of battery would the grid take before we start looking at other options to have a more affordable tariff in the grid, I suppose? Maybe you have any numbers or?
The numbers guy.
Actually, I think that's a hard question to answer, and it kind of links to your earlier question as well as to when will solar become the base load, solar plus battery. Now, I think if you look at the numbers itself, we can really see that in terms of LCOE, solar plus storage is really the lowest. I mean, that's on paper. So I don't think the question is on the technical side. I think the question is really more on the implementation side.
Okay.
Right? So we've already heard there's grid congestion, and I think sometimes there are legacy issues as well in terms of the incumbents and the kind of fuels they prefer. So yeah, I mean, to me that's not a straightforward mathematical question. I think it really depends on the market circumstances.
Okay, and from Huawei's side perhaps?
Yeah, thank you. I think from the cost perspective, now we are seeing the solar itself is reaching the price parity already. Yeah, and we're expecting the solar plus energy storage will soon reach prosperity if we combine them together. And we were talking about the constraint or the threshold of the solar renewable energy. I think with the technology breakthrough, the ceiling is going higher. I can share, I think the gentleman mentioned the microgrid. I can share a couple of cases. We built purely 100% solar plus the battery storage project in Red Sea, Saudi Arabia. And the whole city was powered by solar, 100% is off-grid, yeah, including the hotels, factories, airports. So that the key fundamental, I mean the key technology behind that one is the grid forming, So the purpose of grid forming is to increase the penetration of renewable. The ultimate target is with 100% renewable, we can form the grid itself without support from the traditional power plant. So I think with technology breakthrough, we will see more and more penetration. Even now, a lot of people is seeing that maybe 50% is a bottleneck. But now, as our technology evolution, we're expecting in the coming 2-3 years, even 100% solar plus the energy storage. Technology point of view, it will be able to provide a stable, traditional legacy power plant like quality of power.
And how far are we in terms of number of years from that scenario?
We have already done 100% for 1 million population. Yeah, microgrid. Yeah. So we are ready.
Okay.
I'm not sure that it's the technology is the limiting factor, right? I think the limiting factor is the elephant in the room is the political roles of different players, and so you're seeing the bet that we made at Stone Peak at Peak is that you're going to see more and more deregulation, and as you see the utilities move into managing the grid and optimizing and improving the grid, and then bringing independent power producers in. What you're seeing already in Australia, what you're seeing already in Japan, what's happened in Philippines, all of the US, it's kind of a natural evolution. As you see that come in, then you're going to see you're going to see policy change, and that policy change is then going to enable us to come in. So you've seen Malaysia just announce the CRESS structure, but then if you look at the wheeling charges and how that's structured, that's going to be extremely difficult for any financier to back. And so fundamentally there's a question there. We're moving in the right direction, but that needs to be structured in a slightly different way in order to really enable more power to come in. And then I suppose the other factor that I think is really important is the change of guard, right? So over the last few years, one company went to Shell, the next company went to Total. That Total company were then partnered with Enios, which is the biggest Japanese oil and gas company. But you've seen them all step back, right? In the last few years, you've seen the oil and gas guys say, okay, I'm probably going to reduce my targets. I might sell a few of my renewable assets. I'm not sure how committed I am to that anymore. And what's interesting is that you're then seeing the financial investors step up, right? Because the grid parity makes sense. We're able to implement projects below the cost of the grid and get a reasonable return. And so you're seeing the financial investors step forward and take more of a position. And I think that's going to have an interesting dynamic when you think about the government policy, the roles of the utilities, and then who's investing. Okay. That's the change.
So that's a good, interesting angle, and we don't have any oil and gas company on the panel, so we can probably talk a little bit more about them. They're the most profit-making companies, right? And you have dealt with a couple. Do you see why are they stepping back? Is it because the returns are not as high as what they would expect from fossil fuel industry?
I need to check my confidentiality clauses at the moment. The target returns for renewables in my previous firm were the same as oil and gas. So we had to achieve the same returns, and we do achieve the same returns. If you close one eye and you squint the other, so if you ignore all the oil and gas projects that are not operating well, then yes, you can say that oil and gas does better than renewables, but otherwise it doesn't. And you also need to take into account the commodity cycle. Yeah. So over the last 2-3 years, they've made massive windfalls on the LNG side. Yeah. They tend to be a large portion of their business is trading, right? So they tend to pivot. The minute they see in the rear view mirror very good returns on the oil and gas side, they'll flip over and do oil and gas. Don't worry, in a few years, they'll change their mind and they'll come back and bid up the prices on renewables. So I see it like that. I see, a few years later, they'll come back. I mean, Christoph England at the front here was in Shell Solar, 20 years ago. So this cycle has been happening for many, many decades. We're just repeating the old story.
It's also future-proofing the business, right? I mean, we are hoping that the world will wean away from fossil fuel at least in the next 20 years, if not earlier. So we're hoping that there'll be a lot more money channelized towards those investments. But yeah, any other comments on that before I move to the second point I wanted to touch upon, which was, there almost looks like two parallel systems, right? One is the grid utility scale projects where the utility will get IPPs or solar projects done. And second is the direct PPA, the corporate PPA activity that's happening, which is quite a driving force given that business imperative is to get clean power and decarbonization. The first one has its constraints, the policy, regulatory, and we are working with Indonesia on the 1 gigawatt program on the grid scale, and I'm sure there'll be a lot more to happen as we move forward. What is the sense? Is the grid going to take more time to get solarized like what happened in Vietnam? Perhaps can we repeat that success story in Indonesia, and what could be the constraints? And second is, how far will be the momentum to continue on the corporate side? How long do we expect them to continue to provide that growth that you talked about, 8 to 9 times, and potentially for the world to meet the 3 times renewable target? It's open to anybody, but just some thoughts.
At least from a Vietnam perspective, investing in the grid is monopolized by electricity of Vietnam. Unless they open it up to a private sector investment and do it quickly, I still see there's a problem with the national grid. So the only growth area really is direct selling to the corporate, and that's the quickest way to do it. And most of the factory is also, majority is the north, but large part from the south where the suns are. So you could do physical direct PPA to the corporate. And with the technologies changing and the cost reduction and the battery storage and so on and so forth, I think that's going to be a huge growth area. You don't need the grid, you just bypass it completely.
Okay. Anybody else?
Let's go back to the mining sectors in Indonesia. I think there's the fast track there, especially the ones which are off-grid. You've got the corporates, they can make their own decision quickly. So that's how we've ended up in that niche and getting those projects moving. The other way in Indonesia is in those kind of specialized industrial parks where they have their own license to be their own grid. That's the other sector where you can you bypass bureaucracy with PLN. But then on the PLN side, they're doing what they call de-dieselization tenders. So I think they've got 100 or 200 sites where they're trying to launch solar with storage to tie in with the diesel power stations. That's one sector that's moving on PLN side. We see other projects coming out in the 10 to 30 megawatt solar and 5 to 10 megawatt hour of battery. Haven't seen the big tenders for the 100 and 200 megawatts yet, but there is movement on PLN's side. I think the corporates is the way to go right now.
Okay.
I think it's interesting to see one of the largest energy users per square meter are the data centers.
Yep.
And then you add into that AI. And if you look at the behavior of the hyperscalers, right? So if you look at Amazon, Facebook, Google, these guys they have the ability to go in right at the top of the government and say, okay, I will come in and I will bring billions of dollars of investment and jobs. But you need to provide renewables, and you're seeing that have impacts on markets that were very monolithic, right, historically. And then they are very ruthlessly going to those governments and saying, I'm going to go here. So the prevention of new data centers here has driven a very big growth in JB and in Malaysia. And now JB you're seeing come out with Crest and things like that to drive some way to do DPPAs. So I think we're going through a turbulent phase, but there's significant pressure that isn't going away, right? They're not going to change their minds and decide, okay, actually climate change isn't happening. We're not really going to do RE100. Let's stop all that. That was just a dream. So that pressure is going to continue. And then I think what's happening is you are seeing the government and the regulators put pressure on deregulation, and then we will go through the technical process. This has all been done before 20, 30 years ago.
Yep.
We don't need to reinvent it, right? Like if you go to the US, you go to any of the states, they've worked out how do we do wheeling, what are the different roles for different parties, how do we do this in a fair and equitable way. So I think that it's kind of inevitable. The DPPA is the only way forward. There's limits, right, on site and close by. So we will end up with the Vietnam DPPA. It's fantastic to see that moving forwards now.
Yeah, and one of the challenges for DPP is possibly mobilizing debt from banking market, right? I mean, you did mention that banks are getting interested, but how far has that become mainstream? And you have done a few projects yourselves. How far are banks comfortable with this distributed clientele, and are they willing to bet on a platform in terms of leverage?
Yeah, so the advantage there is that the banks, a lot of these bulge bracket international banks have done this before, right? So they're just replicating something that they've done elsewhere. So what I find really interesting is when you go to a new market, and you're seeing these just happen for the first time, Korea is starting to do that at the moment, the local banks tend to put in slightly difficult terms and conditions in their docs. And then it's very easy to go to an international bank and say, hey, why don't we replicate what you've done in 80% of the rest of the world with billions of dollars now? They say absolutely happy to do that. So they can get an edge. So it's really interesting to see the international banks come into markets that would traditionally be quite difficult for them to enter and take positions because they're just applying the global best practice. Yeah. And I think that's why, I mean, like someone like me is still able to operate in Asia because there are global best practices that we can bring that will help to have significant impact and leapfrog through this process rather than making all the mistakes that we made in the UK over the last 2 or 3 decades.
Yeah. Eric, do you see a lot of banks interested to do this anyways?
May I'll put it this way. It's the starting point is there. And I'll come back to what Gavin was saying in a second. On the Indonesia side, maybe because we've had bank relationships from the older FIT projects, maybe that helped us get the refinancing for those really small microgrids. But at least we see that support there. I think we'll get it again as we do round 2 expansion on those small microgrids. So that's Indonesia. On Philippines, what Gavin was just saying is what's in the details. So this call I had yesterday with one of the local banks, wow, it sounds great. They want bite-sized projects. They'll do solar and batteries, and I'm flying high in the call. And then I put the phone down. I was like, you know what? Let's wait till I really get down there and find out what they really want. And I think then it'll be a little bit more of a tricky story. But at least you actually hear the right tone and right pitch that they want to move down this path.
All right. And Don, do you see a lot of banks supporting?
Well, we have not physically executing one project on that PPA yet because the regulations just passed.
Yeah.
But the preliminary discussion with the banks, especially international bank, they're much more favorable. As I said earlier, from a risk profile, the corporate risk is better than what they're having right now in Vietnam. So yes, very positive response. But again, let's get down to the first project, get over the line when they first sign the check, and then we'll know.
Okay. A few years back, we did a project in Dubai. So we did a solar PV project. The tariff was around 3 cents. That point in 2017. And then we did a CSP project to complement the solar PVs with molten salt, which was essentially the way the PPA was structured that it is only able to generate when solar PV doesn't generate. So it was perfect complement. And the tariff we got for the solar CSP project there was 3 times the tariff of solar PV, right? But of course it was good for the grid, right? You store it and you generate in the night hours. The question, I guess, and one of the questions that has come from the audience as well, apart from battery, what are the other storage solutions we should be looking at to make solar mainstream? And then a related question could be, when do you see the solar battery prices? Will they follow the same trajectory as solar PV followed the last 10 years?
So as I understand it, there are basically 2 questions, right? I mean, other than batteries, what other storage options there are for solar? So I guess all of us know that for batteries, it's basically we consider it a short duration storage, right? So the other options in order to make solar a reliable power grid supplier, I mean, we have to consider long duration storage. Now, long duration storage, hydropower will be the most obvious one, but of course that is very dependent on the kind of geography that you are in. So in terms of LDES, I think it really depends on what countries you are talking about. And if you look at batteries in terms of technology as well, I think there are chances once beyond 2030, you're going to get different technology that can provide longer duration than just batteries, than just the 4 hours storage that we talk about for batteries. So yeah, I mean, in terms of storage, I guess we have to divide into long duration, short duration, and then we see what the options are from there.
And any view on the trajectory it will follow over the next 10 years?
For sure, it is going down. But if you're asking me to pin the number on it, I will excuse myself from that. I mean, but again, if you look at modules, if you look at storage, prices are definitely going down. I guess my only concern again will come down to the different trade dynamics that's going on in the world right now. I mean, just looking at solar modules, for example, I mean, you have China. Basically, you can buy modules out of China at less than 10 cents per watt. But if you go to US, you have to pay close to 30 cents. I mean, that's a result of the trade dynamics between all these different countries. And you might argue that, but it's US and China, maybe it's an isolated case, but China is China's production capacity of its modules basically exceeds its own demand, by double its own demand. So those modules have to go somewhere. And wherever they go, that will have an impact on the trade policies as well. So yeah, I mean that's maybe another cause of concern or something that we should look at as well. Yeah.
Okay, Mr. Sun.
Normally, when we assess maturity of a technology for energy storage, we have 7 parameters: CDEL, PTS, cost, density, efficiency, lifetime, power multiplying, temperature range, and also the safety. So those are the 7 parameters we normally to assess the maturity of the battery. So look forward for the coming 3 to 5 years. In short, we are expecting that the lithium-ion battery will still be the mainstream. There could be some alternatives in the short to medium time range. I think 2 most possible technologies. One of them is a sodium-ion battery. In terms of the cost, theoretically, it could be lower than the lithium-ion battery. In terms of the temperature range, is much more broader, and the lifetime is very good. But currently, as of today, the cost is still around 30 to 50% higher than the lithium-ion battery. And the power density is around 30 to 50% lower than the lithium-ion battery. But we're expecting in the coming 3 to 5 years, if it moves good, it could be an option in some scenarios for energy storage. This is the sodium-ion battery. Another technology is hydrogen. I think we probably have a lot of expectation on the hydrogen, and we believe it will be one of the mainstream technologies in the long term, especially for the long time energy storage for days, for even longer than days. So that could be a good option. In terms of the challenge right now, I think the cost and also the efficiency is still a challenge, especially because of the storage and transportation that cause a lot of cost, it cause a lot of energy loss, efficiency loss. So, but we're expecting in the time range of 5 to 10 years time range, this could be a mature, could be an option in a lot of scenarios for long time energy storage. There are other scenarios. There's a liquid flow, there's a melting salt, but it's more of a specific scenario. In terms of the common adopted technologies, lithium-ion battery in the 3 to 5 years time range will still be the mainstream. But eventually, it's going to be a combination of multiple technologies together.
All right, Erik?
Just to add to that, so I think we have reasons to be optimistic on the solar side. I agree. I don't want to put a number onto it. I think in the next 4 to 5 years, we'll see a 50% cut again in solar as we move to the next form of technology. I think we're just at the beginning of the whole process. And I think that there is a chance that we have another big manufacturer. So I'd be interested to hear the Huawei view, but I think you are starting to see serious investments in India, and you could see quite a significant manufacturing capacity there. I'm not really convinced that the US is going to be viable, and whatever subsidies you throw at it, I don't think that's going to work. But I do think that India could have a fundamental cost base that enables them in 5 to 10 years to be a significant player in the market.
Yeah, just a couple of extra perspectives on what you were talking about earlier. Call it mainstream and future mainstream. One on Indonesia with PLN putting in batteries with the projects, it is mainstream. On the Philippines side, there's a second tier in the Philippines solar market. It's for what are called electric cooperatives. They operate all of the local grids. They are all subject to what's called RPS, Renewable Energy Portfolio Standard. They all have to transition to renewables, adding 2.5% of their energy mix has to grow year by year with more renewables. In the past, they were all really happy with just come and talk to them on straightforward solar or hydro, and they're good. This year, that has started to change. They're now saying, if you're going to bring me solar, you need to bring me batteries as well. And it's particular not to every cooperative, but in certain regions where there's grid instability or where they've got really high power costs, they want to use the battery for evening use. I've even talked with investors who say, you know what, if you're only going to do solar, we're only going to be interested if there's a battery component to it. So I think that's just a theme around where solar and batteries are going, that it has to be part of just the mainstream mix. Coming to future mainstream, I think the day when we can look at having batteries integrated competitively with rooftop solar, that would be truly mainstream.
Right. And maybe we are 5 to 10 years away from that.
Yeah, that's still a little ways out there. But okay, that'll be great for the countries that don't have those strong net metering policies.
Right. Is there any question? Okay. If there are any questions, please go ahead here. Why don't you take this?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Marcus Wong. I sit with the Transaction Services team with Arab, and I come from Australia. So foremost, thanks for the very insightful and a lot of nuggets of information from the panelists. Now, across yesterday and today, we hear how much the main theme across the countries here in Southeast Asia and maybe Asia at large is how the CPPA, or some of you say the direct PPA, plays such a pivotal role, right, with all this. And we hear from Don, you're saying that in Vietnam, it is the manufacturer like Samsung and LG who's driving that and encouraging the government to do that. And Erik, you were saying about in the Singapore around here, where it's also the case in Malaysia, is the CRES, where it's driven by the customer to the government. Now, here's the thing. When you look at other countries like in Taiwan, it is actually the other side. The government in the offshore wind industry is driving the CPPA, right? So in the 3.2 auction offshore wind in Taiwan, the government is saying that, hey, you need to have the CPPA. We are not going to give you a FIT. We are not going to give you the tariff. So my question is, what are the obstacles, what are the hurdles that the governments, the states in Southeast Asia, why are they, I wouldn't say requires, but why are the customers driving that instead of something like in Taiwan or in Australia, where the government is actually saying that you do that, right? You go and find a CPPA.
Okay, so we'll take that question. You want to ask your question as well? There's a question there as well.
Yeah, actually slightly related. So TNB in Malaysia has had lots of experience with tenders. They know exactly the price for PV plant. And I think they've exploited this because they know the return that parties make. So in their CRES, they're extracting 45 cents with no batteries and 25 cents with battery per kilowatt hour to leave the developers absolutely nothing. So instead of CRES, maybe it's crass. And I was very interested that in Vietnam, you're saying it's quite profitable. I'd like to see the difference in how the government is doing that. Presumably also wheeling power through the grid to the corporate. You're not building your own direct connection, are you? So how is that? Do you think we'll see this in Malaysia perhaps that the TNB's take will come down?
Well, if I can just jump in. So first, we've gone from the very best structure that I've seen in Asia, where you've got Thai Power basically saying we'll give you an underwritten feed-in tariff on the previous tenders. And what they're finding is you can go in and out of the PPA, right? So you can have a feed-in tariff from the government, you can take that, then you can decide, you know what, I've signed a CPPA higher, you can move to that, take that for a bit, if that falls away, you can come back to the government. So the truth is that it's already happened, right? So it's exactly the way government regulations are meant to happen. They start with a subsidy, and then they can drop that out, and the corporates will take over. The problem for me with TNB is not so much that they have, so normally if you've got a 100 megawatt hour PPA, then your wheeling charges will be 5% or 10%. And in Malaysia, it's 75%, right? So okay. That is difficult to accept, and yes, they've worked out how much we are going to get, and then they've worked out how can we squeeze you as much as possible. That's understandable, but what you can't do is then say, we're going to change it every 3 years, because for international investors, we know what that looks like. So in Romania, 15 years ago, same structure, implemented 4 or 5 gigawatts of renewables, and then they just said, we've changed our mind, we're increasing the wheeling charge 7x, and just killed the entire industry. All of those cases still in the international courts of justice. You're never going to win against the Romanian government. We've seen it. We know what happens. So we are not going to get into something where we're going to put in long-term investment. We need long-term return, and we need stability on that.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. Any other comments on the questions? All right, good. We can probably take one last question if it's okay. We'll go with the lady here.
Thank you very much for the discussion. It was very interesting. So I think for today, we're mostly talking on the deployment side. But as ASEAN increases in deployment, I think it's natural that they also want to have an increased share in the manufacturing and the supply chain. So you see that in Indonesia with, I think there's a local content policy where 20% of solar panels have to be made in Indonesia. You also see the President Jokowi fighting for rare earth material processing for EV batteries. So going forward, I wanted to ask in your experience or your thoughts as investors or developers, is this move towards trying to capture more and more parts of the vertical supply chain towards ASEAN, is it a hindrance, is it an advantage, and how you think it will affect your businesses or the industry?
Very good question. Supply chain localization.
If I start, then I think we should hear from Huawei. So for me, over the last 20 years, you've seen different countries try to do that. And 20 years ago, you saw Canada say, okay, I'm going to be the #1 solar panel manufacturer, and Canadian Solar dropped in there, set up a plant that lasted 3 years, I think, then they left. They also did the same thing in Indonesia. So I like market forces. I like supply demand. I like people going to where the best costs are. And I think that's what we need as an industry. And I can understand wanting to grab that manufacturing and thinking about that as an energy security risk. But this is long-term infrastructure, and I think I think it's an act of self-harm, right? I think you're seeing the same thing in the US, right? You're trying to artificially drag manufacturing into your country. It doesn't work like that. And all you do is kill, the development, the project management, the asset management, O&M, the debt, the equity. You kill everything else while you're trying to grab some technology. So I think it's probably engineers trying to grab, cool toys rather than really help the community. So yeah.
Any other alternate views?
Actually, from our side, we are first we're very open to contribute more to the local content perspective. From our business, like we have the manufacturing facilities in Europe, in Latin America, in Asia, outside of China. So we have a distributed places for different type of business, different type of products. But this is a first. I think second thing is, I think there's motivation from the local government and local communities, but also very important for us to consider if there's a material or there's a foundation of ecosystem and the talent, and that is very important. Maybe for the panel or for the battery cells, they will consider also the material supply, etc. Yeah, but I think eventually, we should be consider multiple factors. Local content is one of the factors. I think the cost, quality, and the sustainability is also very important. But in general, we're trying our best to support that direction. But there time to time there might be some limitations. Yeah.
Perfect. One last point, Adon.
I think what Gavin said is correct. It's just market-driven. And so Vietnam's looking at this whole localization thing, but I don't think we're going to panel because there's no way you can compete with China manufacturing scale in panel. But we are looking at some of the battery storage and battery solution because some of the raw material we have in Vietnam. I guess most countries go into manufacturing something because they want your value add to the raw material they have on hand, like in Canada, for example. So battery, yes. So you need to be very smart and selectively localize certain production. You may not want to go into an area that you can never compete, like the panel.
Yeah, so I mean, this is much more intricate issues, and those of us who have read Competitive Advantage of Nations will sync up with this, but I think the scenario is much more complicated now in terms of just transition, generating employment, taking the economic benefits and providing a captive market. Thank you very much, my panel members, for this interesting, exciting discussion. I'm sure they're available post this session as well. So thank you for all your participation as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. If you could gather at the center for a
picture.
Family picture.